welcome to the Magnificast, the podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Dean Detloff.
And I'm your other co-host, Matt Bernico.
And folks, we've been doing some goofy episodes the last couple weeks, and we are, in part, going to do some goofs in this one, too. We've been working really hard on this degrowth book, and it's coming along, but it is really limiting our time to think about literally anything else. And so we thought maybe this time around, we will do some goofs to pad out the episode. But we want to talk about something that's been sticking in our craw. It is crab season, after all, and we thought we might as well spend a little time talking about what's making us crabby. And I'll give you a preview of what that issue is, and then after that, we'll descend very briefly into the formerly known as Bone Church, Bone Zone area of our Family Death Center. And the issue we want to talk about is there's a lot of discourse about whether or not these kind of right-wing folks in power, the Donald Trump circle, if you will, are in fact Christians. People on the internet, they've got mixed feelings about it. A lot of people want to say they're not Christian at all. They want to say they're heretics. They want to say they're apostates, whatever. And we're going to turn on the old Magnificast refrain here and say, what if actually they are Christians and so much the worse for all of us, and we have to deal with that. But before we get there, I do, Matt, want to just kind of open this extremely creaky door and usher us down the steps into this bone area. You can see I've added a few cobwebs. They're artificial for now. I figure eventually we'll get them, we'll earn them just by virtue of having it here long enough. But I felt like it needed some more yucky vibes. You can see I've added a few more candles and torches, which if you give me a minute, I'll just kind of light them up. But what do you think of the new spaces? Any improvements that we need to do to this space?
It's looking good. There's only one improvement, and I think that you know exactly what I'm going to say. It needs more bones. Yeah. We got to get more bones down here. The skeletons that we have are great, but we need some more.
We do need some more. And I meant to tell you this in our big church team meeting this morning, and it just, it seemed like it wasn't important enough to get on the agenda with everybody. And I thought we'd have more of a bilateral chat about it, which is I did approach the family of a particular parishioner. I won't say who yet, but they're, I would say, pretty close to the end, and just kind of opened that conversation to say we have a really unique opportunity for this particular person to become the very first addition to the Bone Church. It will, just like in the Capuchin crypt, it'll be about 30 years until their bones are really ready to be disinterred and kind of put up in a pleasing way. But I'm broaching it. I'm trying to think of some tactful ways to introduce it, get it in writing, etc. And maybe we can workshop that a little bit more. But just to let you know, we're doing some field tests, and I'll welcome your feedback when you're ready.
Yeah, I talked with Albert from marketing, and Albert tells me we have to start incepting people into this, that we need to start planting the seed early and getting them to just get really comfortable with the idea that their bones are going to be down here someday. Mm-hmm. And I agree with him. Maybe we borrow a relic or two and just kind of have it around in the church, and that way people can be like, these bones are pretty good and they're totally harmless, and if I'm especially good, if I lead a truly saintly life, then maybe people will feel that way about my bones and they'll want to be in the church. Okay, so we got to get a relic in here, and then we have to have a plaque beneath the relic that says, this could be you someday.
This could be you. Exactly.
Watch this space.
Watch this space. Yeah. Bones will look great on you. We could start selling some t-shirts that say that on it.
Isn't there, this is a serious question, or not a question, a recollection. Did you tell me at once that there's a church in Toronto where some guy's heart is in the wall and he was just like a donor to the church? Okay.
Yes. Not only that is true. And also they can't remember where the heart is in the church. They only know that it is in the church, which I think is the best part of it.
Man, we started telling the jokes, and then I was like, isn't this a real thing? Didn't we do this actually? Christians speaking, not me. I wouldn't do this, but Christians have done it. Great.
That's right. We can kind of, I think maybe those are some rules we're going to have to sort of over time. For example, where do the organs go? Maybe those have to go in the wall, whereas the bones stay outside of the walls. Those are all kind of things that are yet to be codified, but maybe people have preferences. We'll have to canvass the church on a particular Sunday.
Yeah, right. Sounds good. All right. I can't think about bones anymore now that I thought about that guy's heart being lost in the church somewhere. Wow. I know. I know. I got to take a bone break.
Yeah, well, that's why you can rely on me. I'll never need a bone break. I'm constantly in the bone zone, and I don't care what people say. That's what I'm calling it. So I'm calling it forever, and no one can stop me.
All right.
And the bone zone is exactly for questions like this. I have just one for you before we talk about the serious issue that we want to talk about on the show. And this one is from 17 hours ago in Our Christianity, and the title is "A Demon is Mad at Me." And the body of the text says, "My GF was messing with a Ouija board." I say Ouija board because that is how they typed it. Messing with a Ouija board on call with
a Luigi
me.
board.
A Luigi board on call with me, and I started trolling it, and it said it was going to murder me. What do I do? And it apparently knew that I had a cross on my wall. So this person, they're talking to their GF. They're on a call with the GF, and a Ouija board demon is saying it's going to kill them. What should they do about that?
I'm sorry. Hang on. He's on a call with his GF, of course, as one does with their GF. Who has the Ouija board, though? Is it he or the GF?
I think the GF has the Ouija board.
Okay.
And she wouldn't be lying. I think we need to assume that.
GFs don't lie is the thing that we all know, so we can rule that out right from the beginning. I think that if you have a cross on your wall, if you are a Christian, then I think that it's fine to make the demons mad at you because you're protected. You're safe, right? They can't get you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good advice. Now, what if you want to leave that room?
Well, you can... you always have Jesus in your heart, so it's not that big of a deal. I think that you'll be safe no matter what room you go into. I think this is an opportunity, if you've got a demon on the line, like they're there in the Ouija board or around the Ouija, whatever, they're in they're Ouija board adjacent. This is your time to really shine and really blow up their spot. This is your time to really tell them about your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and how that demon can't get you. I think you could taunt the demon a little bit.
True. There is some...
It's not called Christus Victor for nothing, right? Like
that's right.
Like Jesus, your guy, he won. And now this is your time to rub it in their face. I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. There is some very similar advice in the comments. One person just suggests saying what is an unattributed passage from Dune about fear being the mind killer. So you could try that, I guess. Doesn't have to be from the Bible. Just something that makes you feel cool is kind of the vibe I'm getting from that. Some people are suggesting the GF is trolling. That's obviously not true.
No, that can't be right. Here's the thing. Here's something I'm just now thinking of. We know about the great biblical gospel story, Lazarus and Dives. There's the rich man. He's in hell. He's looking up from hell, and he's like asking for some water. And maybe this is something similar. This is sort of a modern version of the story where the demon is trying to talk to you. And this is maybe your opportunity to show a little grace to this demon. Could you just tell the demon, like, what's going on in your favorite TV show right now, or like something cool about the world that maybe the demon doesn't know? That might be something. Like, sure, you can't give the demon any water, but you could tell them about what's going on in the show Severance, and the demon would be like, wow,
I really got to rethink what I'm doing here.
Yeah, they'd be like, humans have got this whole thing going on up there that seems worse than hell. Called work. So maybe you should rethink some stuff going on down here. Yeah, exactly.
Right. I'll give you another piece of advice that comes from the Little Flowers of St. Francis, which I was reading recently. There's a very funny story where somebody comes to St. Francis and he's like, my guy, the devil himself is chasing after me and I'm really nervous about it. And what should I do? And St. Francis has some really good advice. He says, when the devil shall say unto thee again that thou art damned, answer him thus, open thy mouth, for now I would void my dung therein. And this shall be a sign unto thee that he is the devil and not Christ, that when thou shalt have thus answered him, he will flee immediately away. And what I really like about this advice is, first of all, he is saying to the devil, you can eat shit, literally. And the key test being that if it's the devil, he'll run away. If it's Jesus, he'll be like, come on, man, that's not cool.
Man, St. Francis has a lot of very interesting ideas about the devil and demons and what they're doing and how God is maybe in control of them. So you could consider that. You could consider what St. Francis said. I really do love the idea about telling a demon about a TV show, something they have no context for and that you're excited to tell them about. You're like enthusiastic. You could tell them about the ending of Lost and spoil it for them. So if they ever do sort of work their way up to the whatever part of hell has a TV, then that show will be ruined for them. And that's kind of funny too.
Yeah. Great. Man, that reminds me. I just got this book of Art Young. He was a socialist cartoonist. Matt, you know this. I'm saying this for the listener. Don't worry. I know that you know this already. Art Young, he was a socialist cartoonist in the early 1900s. He wrote a bunch of stuff for socialist newspapers, and he made his own version of the Inferno, which is really funny. It's like cartoons, but also kind of a narrative. And in the narrative, the idea is Art Young, he goes to hell. He finds an entrance to hell in Chicago, just like Dante in Italy. And he goes down and he interviews the devil. And he's like, Satan, aren't you nervous? Because all the capitalists, when they die, they're obviously going to come to hell. And they might, cause trouble for you. And Satan's like, don't even worry about it, man. We know how to handle bad people. That's like our job. It's what we've been doing. But then Art Young goes back many decades later, finding another entrance in New York. And it turns out that all the capitalists have actually deposed the devil, and they've industrialized hell, and all the sinners and the demons are like a new proletarian class in hell. So maybe that's the key, is like radicalize the demons now, so that on the chance that you do get to hell, you kind of have, you'll know the union steward when you get there, and you guys can do something about the capitalists who own it.
That's a great plan. Start organizing your coworkers. I'm pretty sure there's not a chapter about this in Jen McAlevy's book, but I'm sure you could start reading there, and you could maybe work your way back to hell. Is what I mean. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I gotcha.
Yeah, no, that's great. There I have it. Thank you so much for this question. I have one question for you as well. That is, I think there's less sort of demonic influence in this one. I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe a little bit of demonic influence. This is a question from the Christianity subreddit that somebody asked 2 hours ago. Is it weird for someone to keep trying to invite me to their church when I already have one? For context, I'm a Christian already, but I've experienced this too many times where people of a different denomination will invite me to a Bible study with quotes around it, and I attend, and they always hint at me coming to Sunday service, knowing I have a church to go to. When I try to reject the invitation, they tell me it's important to be close to God, and I'm confused. We don't really go out and invite people to church in our denomination. They are perhaps a mainline Christian. Good job. Not being, I guess, completely weird. Of course, we will welcome people and encourage them to come, but we don't do the whole thing where we go out and invite people. Their question is this weird? And of course it is. We already know the answer to that question. Is it weird? But Dean, being a Christian already, how do you juke people who are asking you to come to their church? How do you say no to the people who are persistently inviting you to Bible study?
That's a good question. I think you should invite them to a counter Bible study, no quotation marks.
Okay. So
you can be
tell me more about how that helps.
Yeah. So you invite them to another Bible study, but you don't have to invite them to your church. That's one thing. I think the key is to kind of provide maybe like a model of how it should go. Like, come over, check out how a Bible study ought to go. We all get together, we talk about the Bible, and at the end, we just go home and we go to our own churches. And then we can come back again next week. I think you have to kind of be the change you want to see in the world.
So there's sort of like a third no man's land church that you can invite somebody to. Is that what I'm hearing? That like there's the first person, and then there's you, and then you're inviting them to a church that is not your own and that's not their own, and then you're both kind of going to it. Is that right?
Okay, you could do that. I'm just saying something even simpler. You just invite them to a Bible study, and that can be anywhere. It can be at a coffee shop, which I guess is where they tend to be.
See.
It can be on the internet. It can be whatever. But the key is that at the end of the Bible study, you don't say, and I'd like you to come to my church. And then like after that, you can be like, did you guys notice anything different about this Bible study? And when they say like, no, it seems kind of the same as ever. And you can say, exactly. I didn't need to invite you to church in order for this to be a good time.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. That's a cool way to really prove a point to somebody. I do like that. Okay, that makes sense to me. I like that strategy. But what if this is kind of going back to my idea again for a little bit. So you'll have to play in the space with me, I guess.
Yeah.
Is what I'm asking you to do.
Yeah.
What if you found the most annoying church in your town, and you're like, you come to my church, and then you tell them it's the annoying church, and then you get them to go to there, and you've basically tricked them into going to a worse church.
And why would you want them to go to the worst church? Why instead? I guess, okay. The problem here is...
Well, because it's like a taste of your own medicine. You know, you're constantly asking me to go to a dumb church that I don't want to go to. Right. But I've tricked you into going to the worst one of all.
Okay, but
now you're hurting.
It sounds to me
spiritually speaking.
It sounds to me like if they're inviting you to the church at the end of the Bible study and that's annoying, they already go to the most annoying church in town, so it feels like it might be impossible.
Oh. And that makes sense. And the most annoying church to the person who already goes to the most annoying church is definitely
your church,
the Anglo-Catholic Church.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah. I think the other way of going about this is when they say, will you come to my church? You can just say something like, will you go bowling with me? It just kind of like, sort of make it seem like you didn't really hear it, or as though like going to church is basically the same as like going to the movies or something, and just be like kind of associate it with things that are more fun. And then maybe they'll get the idea that you don't want to go to their church, but you would kind of keep hanging out.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I want to hang out with a person that is inviting me to their church over and over again. But
listen, I agree. I'm in the same boat, but this person obviously doesn't have that problem, because the question isn't how do I get out of the Bible study? The question is how do I handle the fact that I'm still going to it, but they keep inviting me. I don't like that.
So the scenario you're proposing is one where you actually really like this person, you want to hang out more with them, but you don't want to go to the church with them.
Listen, it's not the scenario I'm proposing. It's the scenario this question asker is proposing. And I'm just saying not everybody has to be like me. I would say I don't want to go to that Bible study anymore, but that is not what this person's saying. I think we need to be, we need to find answers that kind of fit the person and can sort of recognize that like some people, they just have different tolerances for that kind of thing. And I think that's fine. We live in a very plural kind of world and so on. And what might be right for this person is to say, look, you don't have to quit going to the Bible study. If you like that, that's fine. But you just need to find a way to kind of, turn the tables a little bit.
This reminds me of one time when I was in university. I was sort of, especially in my later years, I was definitely an annoying person to be around. I mean, I'm still an annoying person to be around, but more so then, especially in Bible contexts. I had just finished up 2 semesters of biblical Greek, and I took, a handful of other Bible classes in university.
Just building the worst kind of human being at one semester at a time. I've been there. Don't worry.
Yeah. One brick at a time, one class at a time. And there's a person in my friend group who was, that type of Christian who really liked to do Bible studies and stuff. And they're like, wow, let's start doing a group Bible study that just as our friends group Bible study. And, whatever, it'll be great. It'll be encouraging. And I was like, sure, why not? I love the Bible. And then I was so annoying the first time around talking about I wonder what the context of this sentence is. I wonder what this word is in Greek. And then I got uninvited to the Bible studies. And in fact, I'm not sure the Bible study ever took place after that. I was so devastatingly annoying to them. So that's a strategy that you could consider.
How did that go? How did they disinvite you? I gotta know.
I just think that they still did the Bible study, but I just wasn't around. Right. Is the thing.
So nobody sat you down. They just kind of ghosted you.
I mean, I still hung out with them in different contexts, but never
right
in a Bible study context again.
Great. So I do appreciate that. Just become kind of the ultimate Bible nerd, such that you intimidate all other Bible nerds to never actually want you to be around. I think that could be a winning strategy.
I think it could be, because when people do Bible study, what they're looking for is encouragement in their life to make life, to the sigh of the oppressed creature is what they're trying to get out of it, And if you can just become annoying and not give that to them, but participate really hard, you'll never have to go again because you'll never be invited, is what my perspective has been.
I think you should go and invite them to your church. I think, maybe this is the counterintuitive pitch. Invite them to your own church, but your church is actually just another Bible study, as I said earlier, but one where everybody's also reading, Karl Marx or a handful of other kind of important, interesting pieces of literature, and just sort of like see if you can radicalize them one meeting at a time. And I feel like that will turn them around pretty quick. It's sort of a game of chicken. This is what's great about evangelicals.
Yeah.
They really, really want you. They want to save you. They want to get you into their doors. And I think it's maybe a good idea to test how much resolve that evangelical really has. What can you kind of invite them to that really makes them earn it?
Yeah, I think that is framing it as a game of chicken is exactly right, because it's like, can you invite them to church, but with a twist so that they will feel like they definitely have to go? It's like, it's their duty to go as a Christian person, as somebody who really is on fire for the Lord. But then they get there and it's like, I don't know, talking about saints and their bones, and then also economics and everything else in between. Yeah. It's a strategy.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. So there you have it. We are gonna just make our way back up the stairs here into the foyer of the Family Life Center. I'm gonna close these doors, which they do creak. I had that installed so that they seem a bit older. I'm trying to find ways to make the crypt look, just like the Capuchin crypt, but maybe even older than that. And we'll keep doing that. So I'm closing them. They're creaking shut. And here we are. Now we're talking about the real stuff. To remind us what it was, I'm just looking at our notes. Right. This is what we were going to talk about. Everybody is confused about whether or not people in power are actually Christian, people on the right. And Matt and I have been talking about it amongst ourselves for a while in the DMs and so on. And we thought maybe we'll just spend a little time talking that through. Instead of doing current events like we would do in a usual lock-in episode, we're going to talk through this theme. And we have talked about this a bunch of times on the podcast in different contexts. Matt did a quick search, and we already found one back when we were numbering our episodes years and years and years ago during the Donald Trump first term. So we've been at it for a while. You can't say we're not consistent. And nevertheless, the masses have not been convinced. So I guess we have to do another episode where we work this out. And Matt, I'm just going to ask you simply, are these right-wing Christians, or are they something else? Something worse? What do you think?
Man, I wonder, I would love to know how many episodes we've actually done on this particular topic. And the answer is probably too many. But it's an idea that keeps coming up time and time again. People love to find ways to distance right-wing Christians from other expressions of the Christian faith because it makes them feel more comfortable or better, or there's a lot of different sort of rhetorical and psychological reasons I think that people do this. But to answer your question, Dean, they are Christians and it sucks. It's just all the worse for us, I think is really what it is. Yeah, I don't know. Do you agree? Is that your position as well?
I agree. I think they're Christians and so much the worse for us. To maybe give like a sort of like quick Magnificast review. The take that we have had for a long time is that Christianity is complicated. And like you said, it makes sense that people want to differentiate themselves from the kind of Christianity that is ruining the planet right now. And I think that, it's probably like a good impulse, or like it's good that people don't want to be associated with that or whatever. But in making that distinction too quickly or too strongly, I think there's like a lot of liabilities, and something we've talked about to death on the show, but maybe we can find some new nuances on it this time around, is that when we kind of make that distinction, there's at least like two problems that come to mind for me. One is that it kind of absolves us from thinking about our own complicity and all the big bad problems that Christianity has created in the world. And the second bit is that it can kind of like blind us to what are the unique contours of domination that are emerging in our world right now, which are shaped explicitly by Christianity in important ways. And if we don't kind of take stock of those two things, we'll not be able to build the resistance we need, and we might also reproduce the kind of Christian abuses that we want to oppose. Does that seem like a fair summary of where we've gotten after years and years and years of talking about this?
Yeah, I think that is pretty good. Yeah, to me, the biggest point is always just that, like, are right-wing people Christian? Like, yes, because they are, like, inescapably caught up in that logic, and, like, they couldn't not be. They couldn't not be even if they tried. But sort of like liberal and like left-leaning people trying to sort of like excise that from their Christianity is like a really harmful search for purity that I think ends up doing more harm than good than just like owning it and kind of living into it or whatever. So yeah, it's worth figuring out and talking about one more time. I think that this particular dialogue, I mean, just like rhetorically, it comes up every time the right wing is sort of ascendant in one way or another. Mm-hmm. It was a huge talking point when Donald Trump was president last time, and it is becoming a talking point again. Just like looking back at our notes, this is episode 122, which is quite a long time ago. We're on episode 450 something. Couldn't tell you. Don't know. Don't care. Not important. But back then we were talking about whether or not Mike Pence was a Christian, and you can see the same tropes kind of repeated then as now, right? Like at the time, back in 2016, like people were questioning whether or not Mike Pence was a Christian because he was complicit in the rounding up and deportation of immigrants in the United States. And, you know, the same thing can be said now. And people are saying it all the time, right? How can this government claim to have any sort of Christian morality when they are doing the exact same thing? We talked about this even just a few weeks ago when we talked about Pope Francis' response to, well, his like subtweet of JD Vance or whatever. So it's still relevant. It's always relevant. It will always be relevant until we kind of like figure it out, which we'll never figure it out. And it'll always just be kind of an eternal return of this conversation in the worst Nietzschean way. I mean, I think, Dean, where do you see this come up the most? I mean, like it's oftentimes like an implicit kind of thing that there's a division, like that politics brings a particular division within Christianity. But I guess where do you see that type of rhetoric playing out mostly in your life, in your position?
Yeah. I mean, I see it mostly on the internet, I guess. But, you know, I see it in conversations too with like otherwise really well-meaning people. Like, I think people rightly want to say like, how can this be Christian? Because they, you know, like they want to say that the kind of thing that Jesus is doing is like qualitatively different than the kind of thing that Donald Trump is building with all his cronies. And I think that is true. You know, like, I don't think Jesus wants us to deport a bunch of people. I don't think Jesus wants to like threaten imperialist invasions of other countries. Like, we know that. I think that's fair. But the thing that we talk about a lot on the show is that Christianity is a complicated thing. You know, it's maybe even like a multiplicity of things. There are tons of Christianities and they're all Christian in important ways. And what I think is also dangerous about that is like talking about Mike Pence and sort of the debate around that time is instructive because, you know, back then people were kind of using fake Christian as a hashtag to talk about Mike Pence. And if the reason for saying he's a fake Christian is that he supported this kind of really brutal, you know, incarceration and deportation of migrants, then it's kind of a funny thing that very conveniently Joe Biden was never accused, for example, of being a fake Christian when he oversaw, you know, more deportations under his term than under Trump's first term, and also had pretty draconian incarceration policies for migrants and so on. So, you know, I think that's the big danger is like when the right is in power, they're the fake Christians. But when liberals are in power, you know, people kind of let their guard down or get some historical amnesia. And so, you know, just like we talked about with Biden, that he in his own way is a kind of Christian nationalist. We conveniently like make the far right this sort of qualitatively different other to us in such a way that like dulls our senses when it comes to you know, the ultimately extremely bad project of a Christian nation like the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is like, man, the right and left of it all is actually very interesting because if you take our position, which I think you should, that Christians on the right are Christians and Christians on the left are Christians, and we're all worse off for it. I think on both sides, but like, you know, it all kind of comes down to the particular like interpretation, like the hermeneutics by which they're bringing their Christianity into the world, right? Christians on the right are deporting immigrants. They are, I don't know, trying to find ways to stop gay people from getting married, etc. And there are a list of grievances that have, I think, a particular root within Christianity. And because like you said a minute ago, Christianity is like a multiplicity of things. They're also, unfortunately, Christian ideas. White supremacy is an idea that is more or less Christian. The colonization of the world is Christian. Heteronormativity is Christian, and like that all sucks, I would argue. But they are all Christian ideas, whether you want to accept that or not. But Christians on the left do the same thing in this other way that I think is equally unhelpful, or at least equally frustrating to me. For example, people Christians on the left will often say something like, it's always that the Bible has to inform all of our laws from the right, but that doesn't ever mean, interpreting the verses about welcoming immigrants or helping the poor or feeding hungry or whatever. Right, like the left does this sort of thing too, where they are importing particular rhetorical structures, particular hermeneutics about what they think is integral to their faith into their politics, which is fine. But like they're both doing it. These are both strategies, and they're not both equal. But what I'm trying to say is that they are all kind of coming from this Christian tradition, this Christian world. They all exist co-concurrently alongside of each other, in tension, in contradiction, and that is what we have to kind of learn to accept. Not that like one is true Christendom or Christianity or something. Both exist, and that sucks for us to have to sort it out, but it just is the way that it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think ironically, there's a pretty helpful biblical way of talking about all this stuff where, Jesus himself says that the wheat and the tares will come up together. And it's only at the end where in the second coming, the Son of God will sort out who's who, who are the sheep and the goats, the wheat and the tares. And I think that's like the kind of thing that these sort of purity narratives miss as well, is that like Christianity is something that is not a pure community. Weirdly enough, there's a book by Giorgio Agamben about the resignation of Pope Benedict. What is it called? It is called The Mystery of Evil. And he makes this really interesting kind of historical study of how Benedict, when he was younger, was really into this one kind of obscure older Christian voice who kind of made a similar argument that like the church is always full of both Christ and Antichrist at the same time. And it's not really till the very end that, Christ will sort of defeat the Antichrist. And until then, we have to like tarry with both of them. And I think that like when we get to this kind of situation that we're in now, that's where these sort of doctrines really make sense, because you have to like there's something important about recognizing that the wolf is among the sheep at all times, and there's really no way of like getting rid of it. And also like you can kind of find those tendencies, like I said earlier, within yourself, right? Like Christians who will, for example, oppose what Donald Trump is doing, sometimes if they're just like average progressive liberals, will be like, this is not what a Christian nation would do. And the U.S., like I'm a proud American, and as a proud U.S. Christian, I think that we should be a true Christian nation. And that kind of move sort of metabolizes, what's already dangerous about Christian nationalism, that it kind of creates a U.S. supremacy, a kind of Christian supremacy that papers over all the violence done in the name of the Christian empire. And I think that the more we kind of recognize that there's an instability within Christianity, and also maybe a kind of instability within ourselves as Christians, the more we can try to kind of stay vigilant to the tools that Jesus gives us to determine whether or not we are being faithful to what he's after, which is responding to the least of these, the cry of the oppressed, etc. And I think that's the key, is to be like, like Marika Rose says in her own work, that Jesus is a bit of a stumbling block to all of us, and I think that isn't lapsing into a liberal, like everybody's got a little problem within themselves or whatever, but instead the opposite of being like, if we really want to liberate the oppressed, we have to recognize the cop that's in our own head and all that kind of stuff, which this approach of being like, I'm not like them, kind of stops you from doing. Yeah, that makes sense. There's another side of this conversation that I think is actually really interesting, that is worth sorting out, is that we're talking about like purity narratives and trying to figure out what constitutes Christianity and what to do with all the contradictions within it.
and ourselves and everything else. There's also another part of this that is actually really important to maybe like guard a little bit. And that is the prophetic tone of Christianity, or the prophetic voice of Christianity. I always think of like when these conversations come up, I always think about how different historical Christians have responded to like the injustices of their time, or the particular structural issues going on, whether it's like the actual prophets of the Bible or people like Benjamin Lay, who were prophets, in the 19th century, I guess. Benjamin Lay, in case you don't know, is a really interesting character in the history of Quaker Christianity.
We did an episode on him with Marcus Rediker back in the day.
That's right. Benjamin Lay was a strong abolitionist when it was not like a popular or common thing to be a strong abolitionist, especially in the Quaker Church. And he ended up getting into like a lot of trouble time and time again with his fellow Quakers for telling them to not own slaves. But anyways, part of that story is that he wrote a book called All Slaveholders Apostates. And there's something kind of interesting about that rhetoric of being sort of prophetic, and saying this is not Christian, or this is like, or you particularly in acting this way is apostasy. And I think that is quite interesting and something I wouldn't want to lose in this conversation. At the same time, it ends up being a loaded rhetorical term to kind of throw around out there, to be like, yes, the slaveholders, they're the heretics, they're apostates, when in fact they're the people holding the keys to orthodoxy. So anyways, there's an interesting bit of rhetoric going on in the back end that is important not to lose sight of in the way that it functions, because it is particularly powerful to be able to tell people like, actually, you suck, what you're doing is evil and wrong. But contextualized, maybe that's like contextualized within a particular Christian community, or there's different kind of like demarcations of how that conversation happens. That is not like on a social media platform or something, which makes it more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, when I think about even terms like apostates or heresy and so on, I think a lot of things about it. They're terms that set up maybe different ways of positioning ourselves with respect to Christian power or Christianity in and of itself, like how we think about Christianity, because the idea is that orthodoxy, heresy, apostasy, they're all trying to create boundaries around what is Christian and what's not. And I think like when Benjamin Lay says all slave keepers are apostates, I think that's like a really cool prophetic intervention. And also, to his credit, Benjamin Lay is probably like one of the few people who could reasonably call someone else an apostate, given that he had he lived in a cave and ate dirt because he was like a good Christian and all that kind of stuff. But I think like in general, though, what that fails to kind of recognize is that in fact, the slave keepers are Christian. Like, what does it mean to be a Christian slave keeper? And that is like a really troubling question that I think is more productive to ask, because you're like, what is it within Christianity that allowed these people to like abuse other people and buy them and sell them, turn them into property, all that kind of stuff? And I think it's a similar question to today. Like, what is it about Christianity that has enabled or, has been very flexible to and amenable to the kind of worst abuses of U.S. power that we've seen in a long time? And I think we have to be able to like account for that, because we also, if you want to stay a Christian, you also want to like, combat that from within, rather than like, I don't know, like I think it just sort of like, it makes you lose the key analytic framework that you need to like understand what's really going on. And I don't know, there's probably a way to balance that. Like, where do you put the kind of prophetic voice, and then where do you also make the sociological or political point that there's Christianity in the mix here? But it's hard to balance all that.
It's true. It's a great point that I would believe it when Benjamin Lay says it in ways that I would not I would not believe it when like Weed Guy 420 says it on on Blue Sky or whatever. There's a difference in their character that I think is important to keep in mind. There's also like, I mean, there's a different sort of conceptual framework that we're coming to the world with than Benjamin Lay is as well. Like, I think the observation that we're making is There's a postmodern critique going on here. We've read some French philosophers that Benjamin Lay hadn't, but there's also like another rhetorical term that I've seen people on the left trying to use more recently that I think is actually kind of interesting, but also problematic for the same reason. So I've seen people say things like, saying that they're not real Christians is it's too weak of an argument. That doesn't mean anything. And actually, we should be calling those people them heretics and apostates, like Benjamin Lay, right? Mm-hmm. But just like you said, it's a tough sell when you're just like a person on the internet and all these other kind of things are going on. When it comes to like in-groups and out-groups within Christianity and who gets to say it is one thing or another, it also ends up kind of giving a bad name to like heretics and apostates who historically have not always been great, but are actually way more interesting than people who are like the protectors of orthodoxy.
Right.
I've been reading this book by Alex Drummond about Thomas Müntzer, who is labeled a heretic and apostate in a lot of different ways by Martin Luther. And I don't know, man. I think that there's something very cool about coming from the outside. I wouldn't want to lose it by marring the good name of heresy.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And, like one person's orthodoxy is another person's heresy and vice versa. And, these are terms that like, well, as you said, we've read some good French philosophers. And like Michel Foucault talks about, right, like truth is kind of an effective discourse and power is also an effective discourse. And like orthodoxy and heresy are terms that kind of, they set up the flow of power in societies and communities and relationships. And sometimes they do that in ways that are like, you can kind of set up those terms in ways that are better than others. Like Benjamin Lay being like, if you own slaves, you must not be a good Christian. You must be an apostate. But more often than not, the majority of the time in history, heretics are the people who get whatever, killed. But some, and like, I don't know, some of them are killed for radical ideas like maybe we shouldn't have private property or that kind of thing. And it's a kind of historical negotiation of how to deploy those terms. And I think we're kind of better off avoiding it. You might be the heretic that that the Orthodox folks want to kill in the end, and maybe that's not really the language we want to lean into.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Let's talk about one more idea before we maybe come to some kind of conclusion about this conversation that we're having ad hoc. Something that I think is really interesting, kind of that comes out of this too, is that there are people who are Christians, who are right wing, who are in power in the government right now. That is true. We know all of that. There's also, like, I think a pretty big group of people who are like, they wouldn't identify themselves as like evangelical Christians in the same way that a lot of Trump people would, but they are like people who are invested in the idea of Christian values or like Christian tradition or something, the cultural Christian, but they use it as like a positive term rather than like a scathing evangelical critique or something. I know this is a stupid example of somebody who does this, but I think it proves the point. Somebody like Richard Dawkins is somebody who is like a quote unquote cultural Christian in the sense that like they are an atheist. In fact, you might know this, but they're a person who's still like really in love with the particular like Christian values of Western culture. And when people say cultural Christian values of Western culture, what they mean is like heteronormativity, they mean white supremacy, they mean like being a racist, like they mean like the ideology that gives them cover to be a racist, where they can say Christian ideology or cultural Christianity, and we all know what it means. But there's like, I think, a growing contingent of that type of person in public life, or Jordan Peterson's another person that kind of comes to mind, where he's like really popular with Christians and he has like a type of like identity within the sphere of Christianity, but he is not himself a Christian. But for the same Richard Dawkins kinds of reasons. And that part is also really bizarre to me. But like, I would still say that those people are profoundly Christian for all the reasons that they are saying that they are, right? Like, they might not believe in God in a real way. They don't go to church or whatever. I guess that's all. That can all be the case, but like they are thinking and acting like Christians in the world. They are like acting under Christian impulses, and And because of it, I think that's pretty Christian. I mean, I don't know. If we said that every person who didn't believe in God was not a Christian, there wouldn't be very many Christians at all, I think. Just another, like, I think, wrinkle to the whole array of ideas in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we're talking about generally what it was like to be like an annoying young person who was too obsessed with Christianity, I'll make the confession that in my 20s, I was a big Søren Kierkegaard guy. And the thing about Kierkegaard, you know, he was a Danish philosopher, for people who don't know, existentialist guy. He was trying to figure out, like, how to be a true Christian, the most Christian that you could possibly be. And he does have this insight that I think is still really interesting to kind of like turn over, even though it is also very complex, where he would say, in the context of like 19th century Denmark, you know, when you're born, you're baptized, you're automatically a Christian. And he would say, if everyone is a Christian, then no one is really a Christian, because you can't really make the choice, the decision to become a Christian. And the whole point of Christianity is that it's this kind of radical transformation of life itself. And it's this calling out of, like, it like calls people out of the daily goings on of what it means to be a person in the world, right? Like, Jesus is doing something weird. And if everybody's normal, then, like, are they really Christians? And I think that there's something to that to a certain extent, that, like, you know, what Richard Dawkins is saying when he's a cultural Christian, he's basically like admitting that he lives in Christendom and that he is a person shaped by Christianity. And for all intents and purposes, he basically is a Christian. And I think that kind of Kierkegaard question of, like, and that means, you know, maybe Christianity is like kind of a barrier actually to following Christ in an important way. I think there's something to that. And what would it mean to sort of betray Christianity in the interest of Christ? I think that's a question that, you know, maybe throws some wrenches in some of these categories in some interesting ways. Although one reason it's complex is, like, for Kierkegaard, that sort of amounts to being like a single individual weirdo in the world. Whereas maybe if you're like reading liberation theology, there's something a little stronger to that like being a Christian means undoing all the kind of oppression that Christianity enables. That's like the thing Kierkegaard can't give you per se. But all that to say, there's something important about recognizing that Christianity has built the world that we live in, and that's very bad. And maybe, like, we have to admit that Christianity is the thing animating all this stuff instead of the thing that's getting betrayed. And you would need to betray that if you really wanted to follow Jesus.
Yeah, it's basically guaranteed that if you go to a Christian university, you're going to be the annoying Kierkegaard guy at one point in your life or another.
That's right.
But I think that sounds pretty good. I mean, not instructive. In fact, I think that's actually really hard to kind of take on that particular role. But but a fun one to start thinking about. Marika Rose, in her book Theology of Failure, she says something, well, kind of the same but different. She asks, what might Christianity be if we think, like, if we do sort of theology from a different position, like the position of someone who is a heretic or someone who's a witch or a slave. Mm-hmm. An interesting idea, though, to think about, like, those boundaries of Christianity, especially when you're trying to think about orthodoxy. But, like, I don't know, thinking about the ways different possibilities open when we consider our, like, positionality within the world and, like, what it means to do theology, or just think about, like, sort of Christian ethics from a particular position. Something that's kind of left out of the conversation when we're talking about, like, what is normative to Christian belief or normative to Christian ethics or something, that they could look very different depending on what the boundary of Christianity is and, like, where we're standing with regard to orthodoxy in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's the key is, like, you know, the more we kind of create those boundaries, the more complex it is to find ourselves inside and outside of it. And, I guess that's why, I mean, when I was referring to that Agamben bit about Pope Benedict, like, for all the faults of the Catholic Church, and there are obviously many, many of them, something I like about it is that it is, like, so obviously messed up. And, like, that's kind of part of it. Like, it's sort of a truism in the Catholic Church that your average Catholic knows that there's, like, I don't know, the bishops are up to no good sometimes, or the priests might not be always trustworthy and all that kind of stuff. There's, like, a sort of stereotype about that. And I think that is a healthy thing, right? That, like, the community, even though obviously the Catholic Church is notorious for deciding who's in and who's out, that's like one of its self-given jobs in many cases. Nevertheless, the reality is such that you kind of recognize the wheat and the tares are all in here together. Like there's there's saints and sinners and everything in between. And there's something helpful about that. I don't think you have to be Catholic, by the way, to like have that perspective. But I think that there's there's another Christian discourse that assumes that, I can get it right, and like I'm not like these other Christians. And I like that there are other kind of Christian ways or Christian communities that affirm like, I don't know, we're kind of just stuck with this problem and we will be basically forever, and we have to like the work you have to do to like keep pushing against those forces within Christianity that are trying to turn Christianity away from Christ to the Antichrist spirit, and you can't really like take a shortcut out of that. I think that's a really important kind of historical insight within Christianity.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the situation that we find ourselves in is not where we can just sort of escape to a true form of Christianity that is like pure and holy and good and obviously productive in all these political ways that we want to be productive. But it's like we have to make everyone know that they are trapped in here with us, and we will make their lives very annoying because of our particular Christian beliefs. And like I think that's what it means to be a Christian, is not that you're trapped in here with them, but they're trapped in here with you.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. People are talking about all kinds of things in there. Lots of discussion about Marx's book Capital these days, and trying to figure out, does he have a labor theory of value, a value theory of labor? Who knows? Who could say? None of us in the Discord, but you can get in there and find out yourself, or share a very strong opinion, whatever you want to do. Our intro is by Amaria Armstrong. The outro is by The Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up.